About really, when you pare it down, the bottom line is that all of our anxieties, all of our worries, all of our fears are really an act of unbelief. It's really an act of not having faith that we can't, and I'm just being real and honest with you here. What that means is that when I have an anxiety, when I have a worry, when I have a fear that creeps up in my life, it's when I say, I don't trust God to do what He said that He will do. That's what that means. When I'm worried about something and I get anxious about something, then I'm saying, I don't have faith that God's going to come through on this one. And so in that, really the bottom line of that is, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, multiple times, don't worry. He says, don't worry about what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, where you're going to live, your health, your future, all of that stuff that we get so easily caught up in. He says, forget about it. Don't worry. Don't worry. And the bottom line of the Christian life is really this. It's that I trust Jesus with my life. And if I really confess and I walk in the life that Jesus has called me to, that means that I can do what He told me to do, which is not worry. I can believe and trust in Him. I can have faith that He'll come through and that He will do everything that He promised He would do. And we lay that framework, we lay that foundation because the second half of that we're going to talk about today is being happy and what that really means. And you can't be happy until you get rid of all the worry. If you're constrained by all your worry and your anxiety and fears, you'll never make it to the last half. You'll never be happy. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 12, it says, worry can rob you of your happiness. And that's absolutely true. It is. If you're constrained and if your whole day is spent toiling over anxieties and fears and worry, how will you ever really understand or be happy? You won't. And it's because of that we try to displace happiness with other things in our lives. There was a poll by Psychology Today magazine. I know it's a periodical that you guys always read. I know you just sit around in the evenings reading Psychology Today. I do too, apparently. No, there was a poll that they took in Psychology Today that said, what makes you happy? So I want to give you the top 5 responses. They polled 52,000 Americans from all ages, from age 19 through 95. And these are the top 5 responses. What makes you happy? Number 1, friends and social life. Number 2, a job or primary activity. Number 3, being in love. Number 4, recognition and success. And number 5, you probably already guessed it, sex makes people happy. So it's interesting that this is the top 5. Polled out of 52,000 people, this is what they said makes them happy. The thing that's interesting to me about this is that all of these are external things that you do or try to make happen. None of it is really anything that's internal or that really satisfies. This popular idea of happiness is really based on having the right set of circumstances, about being in the right situations, or if things are going well, or if I'm in the right spot, or if things line up correctly, then I'm happy. And Solomon in the Bible, there's a chapter, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, where Solomon talks about this. He's the wisest guy that ever lived. He was the most rich guy that ever lived. He had it all. And he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1, I decided to enjoy myself and find out what happiness really is. I said to myself, let's try pleasure and the good things in life. So he said, I'm going to figure out this whole happiness deal. I got all this wisdom God gave me. I got all this stuff. I'm going to figure out what happiness really is. And it says that he found 3 dead-end roads. The first one, he tried accumulating things. He was the richest guy that ever lived. He had more gold and more silver than any other king in history. He was the richest guy that ever lived. He tried accumulating all this stuff. And he said he found out that in trying to accumulate things to get happiness, and this is true for all of us, how many of you have said, if I just had $10,000 more a year, we'd be great. If we just had a little bit more, it'd be great. If I just had this one more thing, if I can just get that TV in my living room, if I can just go acquire, whatever it might be for you. Solomon said the same thing. He said that in his search for accumulating things to get happiness, what he found was he always wanted just a little bit more. And it's the same for us. The second dead end that he found was experiencing pleasure. This guy had hundreds of wives and thousands of concubines, and he could do anything he wanted to. He tried to experience every kind of pleasure. He says, I have tried it all. I've experienced everything. He tried everything there was, and it always left him with a temporary thrill and then emptiness. And then he said he also tried achieving success. He built huge things, monstrous castles and kingdoms and palaces and aqueducts and all this stuff to make his kingdom really great so that he could achieve success. And how many of us in our lives try to achieve happiness by, if I get to this status, if I'm to this place where people look at me and say, oh man, that guy's arrived, then I'll be happy. And it's still the same. Just a little bit more. We get to this level and then we want to be at that level. And we get to that level and then we want to be at that level. Oh man, when I can be just a little bit more. And so in verse 17 of Ecclesiastes 2, Solomon concludes this search for happiness with this. All of it is meaningless. A chasing after the wind. These three dead end roads that he tried. Achieving, acquiring things, trying it all, going after every kind of pleasure, achieving status and success, all of these things led him to dead ends that didn't amount to real happiness. Jesus says there's something different. Happiness is not about situations or circumstances. God has a different view of happiness. He says that it's actually an attitude. God's way of happiness is having the right attitude. So I want to read to you today out of Matthew chapter 5, and verses 3 through 12 here. And these are the Beatitudes. And it's interesting to me that God wrote the Bible. We get that. We know that he wrote this. And so when he laid it out, he knew how important the Beatitudes were going to be to us. He knew what he was going to do when he wrote all this stuff down. And it's interesting to me that the one topic Jesus chose to talk about in front of all these people, giving this huge, popular, what he knew would become a famous sermon of his, one of the most famous, if not the most famous sermon of Jesus particularly. He talked about happiness, about how to get happiness, because I think that he knew we were all searching for it, and few ever really find it. And so he says in Matthew chapter 5, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All these bless this and bless that and bless when you're this and bless when you're that. This word blessed really is an old English word. The Greek word that they use here is called makarios. And makarios really just means happy. It means happy. So you can read that and you can say, happy is the person who, and fill in all those blanks. And it kind of sounds like Jesus is making some really serious contradictions here. Because our idea of happiness is based on circumstances, and Jesus is saying, happy when you're poor, and when you're mourning, and when you're hungry, and when you're thirsty, and when you're called to be a peacemaker, and when you're persecuted, and when you're reviled by others, and they utter all kinds of evil against you. It's okay, you're happy then. It's like, no, what? Like that's a complete and total contradiction. What are you saying, Jesus? That doesn't make any sense to me. The fact is that he's saying you can be happy in spite of all of these circumstances. The truth is, no matter what's going on in your life, there is a way to receive happiness. In fact, if everything has to be perfect and in line and all the things have to line up right so your circumstances get right, all your bills are paid and everything is great before you can be happy, I hate to break it to you, but you're never going to get there. It's not going to happen. Instead, Jesus says, my happiness is not determined by what's happening around me. It's determined by what's happening in me. Happiness begins right inside here, and that's where it stays. It starts as an attitude. So I want to take 3 of these this morning, focusing primarily on 2, on verse 3 and verse 6. And I want to talk to you this morning about what happiness really means as an attitude. It doesn't depend on what we have, but on what we are. It doesn't depend on the atmosphere outside. Instead, it depends on the attitude inside. It doesn't depend on external circumstances. Instead, it depends on internal character. It's an attitude and a choice. And the first step to happiness, in verse 3, he says, happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, what does he mean when he says poor in spirit? It doesn't mean low self-esteem or putting yourself down or thinking lowly of yourself. I've been there. I've tried that. I know that self-deprecating behavior where you put yourself down in this false humility. Oh, I'm no good. I'm sorry. All of that stuff. And that's not what Jesus is talking about here. That's really false humility. That's really selfish pride. Making yourself look humble so that you'll think, I've become so humble. Look at me. Yeah, that's fake. Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about real humility. Jonathan already hit on this morning. He's talking about the humility that comes when we come before God and we realize we really need to be brought low before him. So how do we achieve this humility? There's 3 things here. Why we should be humble. The first one is it reduces stress. It also improves my relationships. And finally, humility releases God's power. It's easy to think about this because when I get humble, then it reduces stress on my life. When I'm humble, it's okay. I can release my job of being general manager of the universe. I can let it go and realize I don't have to control everything that happens around me. It's okay for me to say those 3 words that any proud person doesn't want to say. I don't know. What? You don't have every answer to every problem? When I bring you an issue, you're not able to just go straight to the chapter and verse and speak God's truth right into my life for anything and everything that might happen? No, I don't. And in humility, I might have to answer and say, let me look at that. Let me call somebody else. Let me call Glenn or James or somebody. Let's pray about this together. When I release being general manager of everything that happens, humility can come into my life, and it releases and reduces stress. And it's the same for you and I. It reduces our stress. I don't have to pretend I'm perfect. I can just be free to be me. It also improves my relationships. So let me just show of hands here. Who here in the room, when you start making out your weekly plans, you think, I'd like to go to lunch with an egomaniacal jerk. Anybody ever I'd really like to take somebody to lunch with a huge head. Anybody ever decide to go take some proud person to lunch? No, you don't like being around proud people any more than I do. It's like, that guy that's always trying to one-up you. He's like, yeah, I went fishing and I caught a fish this big. And he's like, oh, I caught a fish this big. And you're like, okay, yeah, your fish was bigger than mine. Thanks. That always, you get it. When we're proud, when our pride puffs us up and we try to be bigger than we are, it's difficult to be around. And Jesus says that's not the way to happiness. Real humility, making yourself low, It allows God to work in you. And most importantly, it releases God's power in your life. He resists the proud, but he gives strength and grace to the humble. James 4:6. And it goes on to say in James 4:7 that if you draw near to God, he will draw near to you. And this is the key to it. Being humble, bringing yourself low before God to say, God, you are incredible. This day, plus one day, 10 years ago, was my first Sunday morning encounter retreat. Exactly to the day. 10 years ago today, plus one day. It was actually yesterday. It was 10 years ago yesterday. That's a lot easier way to say that. 10 years ago yesterday was my first encounter retreat. And when I look back on that, and the kid who was in such a dark place, whose life was messed up, who was living in the midst of sin, trapped in my own prison, and what God has done in my life in 10 years, that humbles me. I'm so thankful for God, what he's done in my life. When you draw near to him in humility, when you get to the end of it and you just say, God, I can't do anything else but come to you, he answers. He comes, he shows the way, and he releases his power in your life to walk through things and to get through things and to make it through hard stuff so that despite your circumstances and your situations, God can come through. And that's real happiness. I look back on my life, what God has done and how he's blessed me, the family that I have, the boys that I have, the church that I'm a part of. Man, you can't make this stuff up, guys. Real life is way better than fiction because God is good. And so he says, key to strength is admitting weakness. It's humility. The key to power is admitting helplessness. The key to happiness is humility. The key to victory is dependence on God. Matthew 5:3 in the Phillips translation. Happy are those who know their need for God, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. All that God has to offer, his kingdom is open to the person who comes to him in humility, humbles himself before God. And then he goes on to say in verse 8, happy are those who are hungry and thirsty for true goodness, for they will be fully satisfied. Happy are those who are hungry and thirsty. In America, most of us don't understand real hunger, right? We don't really get real hunger. Like our idea of hunger is, oh man, maybe let's go get a Big Mac. Like Mac attack is hitting me, I need to go get a burger. Or, we don't really understand that. Mother Teresa said, in India, people really understand hunger. They're dying of starvation. In America, people don't understand hunger. It's emotional hunger that they're dying of. And that hunger is inside of all of us. Everybody is spiritually hungry and thirsty. We all are spiritually hungry and thirsty. We just don't use those words. I don't say like, man, I'm really spiritually thirsty this morning. I really could use some spiritual nourishment. I'm kind of spiritually hungry today. Like we don't use those words. That doesn't even sound good. Like it just doesn't make any sense to us. Instead, we say stuff like, man, my life just, it feels empty. Like I'm missing something. Like, is this all that there is? It just feels like there should be more to it. What's the point? All of that is saying, I'm hungry for something more. There's more to it that I'm not getting. I'm malnourished spiritually. That's what you're saying. And so Jesus gives us this verse. He tells us that we can be happy when we're hungry and thirsty for true goodness, for righteousness, for they will be fully satisfied. So how do I experience satisfaction in my life? The first one is to recognize my real hunger. Just as in we try to cover up happiness with all kinds of pursuits, we try to cover up our hunger and our real desires and passions with all kinds of stuff. You know, my wife and I know that you guys don't do this. You're way more decisive than we are, but we go out on a date and I say, hey love, where do you want to go to dinner? And she says, I don't know, where do you want to go? And I say, oh, I'm good with whatever, just wherever you'd like to go. And she says, oh, I don't know, do you want anything in particular? And I say, no, I'm really good with whatever you want. I don't know what you want. And she says, I don't know where I want to go. But you guys don't ever do that, right? Like, no, as soon as you get in the car, you know where you're headed, what you're going to order. Yeah, I'm sure you guys are way more decisive than we are. Right, okay. So, we all do that. We play this game of, I feel hungry, but I don't know what I want. In reality, there is something that we all need, and we all need to realize what we really want. We are spiritual beings. I don't care how you look at it or what's happening. Everything in your life has a spiritual component to it. It all does. Everything is spiritual. And in that, we are made spiritual. God made us to know him and to be loved by him. He made us to fit together with him. And so we have to realize that your deepest need, at the very core of what you're looking for, your deepest need is to know God. Nothing else will fill the God-sized hole in your life. You can stuff all kinds of stuff into it and try to pack it in, but it will never be complete and it never satisfies. You have to know real hunger. Your real hunger is for God. And then we have to stop eating spiritual junk. There's so much stuff out there that's quote unquote spiritual, that's just junk food. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been on an encounter retreat, but there is lots of food. Like, you worship and you pray and you get ministered to and then you eat. And then you worship and you pray and you get ministered to and you eat. And on the leader's side, like Tom and Jean's room is stocked. Like, it is candy corn because it's fall and that's my favorite. And then like those little pumpkins. There's all kinds of junk food up there. And all weekend long, like, it just happens, right? All weekend long, you're like, well, that's good, one. And then they bust out the Oreos, and it just continues. And you just keep, and then you get to the real meal, and you're like, I'm not even hungry. Like, ugh, how can you eat at a time like this? And it's been happening all weekend long. And that's how we are. We feed ourselves with spiritual junk food that fills our lives. When we get to the real meat of stuff and Jesus starts to speak to you, you're like, yeah, I'm not even really that hungry for you right now. There's a plant called the Nardoo plant in South Australia, and its spores create this, like, you can use the spores to create a mash or a meal that you can create bread out of. And these people in South Australia, sometimes they make this bread out of this Nardoo plant, but it has absolutely no nutritional value. No carbohydrates, no proteins, no vitamins, absolutely nothing. So they eat it, they eat this bread, and they feel full, but eventually, if that's all they have, they'll die because it gives them no value. And that's what spiritual junk does to us. Instead, Isaiah 55:2 says, why spend your money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? Stop wasting your time and your money on stuff that doesn't really satisfy. Instead, look to the one who does. It's interesting. I always go into an encounter retreat with the best expectations. Like, I'm going to eat really well this time. Like, I'm only going to eat a little bit and only at the right meal times. And, and then when everybody else starts to nibble and they start to graze, then you just kind of, one candy corn is okay. It's all right, And then by the end of it, I'm like, pass the cheese dip. Let's just go for it. Come on, let's just do it. Or maybe this example, like, if Shepard, my 3-year-old, if he's hungry, he's like, hey, Dad, I want a snack. All of a sudden, Ethan wants a snack too. Anybody ever experienced that? Like once one kid is hungry, all the kids are hungry. And it's true in us as well. Your appetite can be controlled or directed by who you're around. And so is your happiness and your attitude towards being spiritually hungry. So I want to encourage you today, if you're not a part of a life group, those are happening right now. They kicked off this month. Get around people who are spiritually hungry. Get plugged into people that will be as hungry as you are for the things of God so that you can feed each other. Otherwise, it's junk. And then start looking to Christ for satisfaction. Jesus said in John 8, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. Bread is one of the basic elements of life-sustaining food. It's one of the easiest things, it's one of the most cross-cultural things that there is that provides us with everything we need to live life. And so Jesus is saying here, I am the bread of life. I am the basic element of sustaining everything you need. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. When you think about like if some massive drought is hitting Africa or there's a huge flood somewhere in the world, what's one of the first things they put on the ground? Huge bags of flour, right? So people can make bread and they can begin to feed themselves. Jesus is saying, I am that for you. I can satisfy. And the bread that I give you, you will never go hungry. And if you believe in me, you'll never go thirsty. In John chapter 4, he says, Jesus said, whoever drinks water will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks water I give will never be thirsty again. It will be in him a spring of living water. This thirst that satisfies and quenches every desire we have. It fills the real spiritual hunger of our lives. And God says happiness is when we are spiritually hungry and thirsty and we come to the right source. When we come to the bread and the water that Jesus gives. That's when we're satisfied. When we have an attitude of happiness. When he fills us. So there's 3 stages to this. I want to ask you where you are. You could say, I want God in my life. Like I realize that I kind of need that, and so I want him in my life. I want that for my family, and I want that for my wife and us and whatever. I want God in my life. Or then you might say, take a step forward and say, I need God in my life. I realize that without him, I'm desperately lost, and I need him in my life. I need him for every day. I need him to help me through situations and circumstances. I need him to hold his promises true. I need him. Or you might say, I'll do anything. I'm hungry and I'm thirsty and I'll do anything to get it. When I was 17, I went backpacking with the Boy Scouts to Quetico National Park in the Boundary Waters canoe area. For 2 weeks, we were backpacking through the outlands of southern Canada, canoeing across lakes and eating whatever we carried on our backs and what we could catch out of the water. When we got back to our outfitter in Ely, Minnesota, I walked into that little cabin area, and there, shining like a beacon of hope, was a pop machine. Oh, it was awesome. And in it was wild cherry Pepsi. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. A cold, glistening, moistened 12-ounce can. It looked phenomenal. I could not wait to have it. And the price on the machine was $3 a can. Jeez, $3 for 12 ounces. Show of hands, who thinks I paid it? You bet I did. Yes, because I would do anything. I had been for 2 weeks in the wilderness, and now here is wild cherry Pepsi. I would do anything. I would pay whatever it cost. It could have been $15, and I would have bought the can because it was back. I was thirsty for that. And Jesus is calling us to the same thing. Happy is the one who is hungry and thirsty and who will do anything, who will pay anything to get that. That's what he's calling us to. I want to ask you to stand with me this morning. Jesus says to be happy is to be humble and hungry. So I ask you this morning, fact is that you need Jesus in your life. If you want to really be able to achieve happiness, it's not based on situations or circumstances outside of you or around you. It's based on what's happening in you. And it requires Jesus working in your life. His power is available, and he is waiting to give it to you this morning. But you must admit your need. That's humility, coming to him in humbleness. You must admit your need and ask him for help. You must be hungry and thirsty for everything that he wants to give to you. Jesus said, happy are those who eagerly seek me, that they will be satisfied, and everything is open to them. The kingdom of heaven is available to them. In John chapter 13, Jesus said, now that you know the truth, how happy you will be if you put it into practice. He's saying, now that you get it, it won't work in you until you walk it out. So I have a question for you. Where do you need to depend on God more? Where do you need to humble yourself in your life and depend on him more? And why are you not more hungry for him? Think back to when you first became a Christian. When your life with God was just beginning and you were on fire for him, that you were excited about being with him and you were hungry for everything that he had to say to you and what he was doing in your life. If you were in the hospital right now and you stopped eating, the doctors and nurses would be worried about you. They would be concerned that your health was starting to fail. If you look back and you can see a pattern of digression where your hunger and thirst for the things of God has gotten less and less and less. Dr. Jesus is worried about you. He's saying your spiritual health is starting to fail. It requires a hunger and a thirst for him. Where do you need to depend on him more? And how hungry are you for him? Or maybe you're here this morning, you're not a believer. You've never actually given your life to him. You've tried all those other areas. You've tried every pursuit that you can think of. You tried acquiring stuff, you tried doing things, you tried achieving, and it's just not working. Jesus offers you happiness, and he offers it to you right now, this morning. It can be yours. It's available to you. Real happiness that satisfies that longing and hunger that's inside of you. It's available to you today. With every head bowed and every eye closed, I want to pray over you. Our prayer teams are coming forward. The worship team is going to lead us in a song. We want to be available. I'm going to ask you to come forward. If you have that longing in you, you've been searching and you've been trying to find something to fill the void, happiness can be yours this morning. Maybe you're here today and you're saying, I've been looking and I need Jesus in my life. I want to pray with you. It's simple to accept Christ into your life and to let him transform you and bring real happiness. It's available to you today.